Hello and welcome to Castar Reviews, and today we're looking at the most critically and commercially successful fighting games of all time, Street Fighter II. Unsurprisingly, Street Fighter 1 wasn't all that well received because it was shit, but Capcom wanted to make more fighting games after the success of beat 'em up Final Fight. As we'll see later, characters and themes from Final Fight will make appearances in Street Fighter games, and it's widely accepted that the games share the same universe. Since Takashi Nishiyama left Capcom for bitter rival SNK, the main faces behind Street Fighter II were Noshiki Okamoto and Akira Nishitani. Suffice to say, Street Fighter II: The World Warrior was wildly successful in arcades and on home consoles. From release until 1995, Street Fighter II cabinets made hundreds of millions of dollars, and the home console version on the Super Nintendo sold 6 million copies. This laid the groundwork for the franchise, and the World Warriors became cultural icons that appear in crossover fighting games and even other franchises like Tekken and Asura's Wrath. This spawned sequels like Street Fighter II Champion Edition, which added the possibility of picking the same character in a versus battle, Street Fighter II Turbo Hyper Fighting, which added additional special moves and balance adjustments, Super Street Fighter II, which brought in 4 new characters, and Super Street Fighter II Turbo, the definitive Street Fighter II experience. The question you probably want to ask me is, why were Street Fighter II and its revisions so successful? Let's take a look. A slight step up from the last game, but there still isn't much story to go off of. All of the editions of Street Fighter II have the same story, with one hidden thing at the end of Super Turbo. The arcade mode is framed as a fighting tournament featuring 8 fighters from across the world: Ryu and Ken from the first game, the Chinese cop Chun-Li, the Russian wrestler Zangief, the Indian shaman Dalsum, the Brazilian beastman Blanca, the American Guile, and the sumo wrestler E Honda. You go through about 11 fights in arcade mode, knocking out each fighter on the main character select screen and then fighting the 4 kings of the evil crime syndicate Shadaloo: Vega, Balrog, a now scarred Sagat, and the big boss of them all, Bison. Interesting thing about the names of these crime bosses: the boxer is actually known as M.Bison in Japan, the matador is known as Balrog, and the Thai dictator is known as Vega. But Capcom was afraid of getting sued by Mike Tyson, whose likeness the boxer is based off of, so they switched the names around. Personally, I think M.Bison is a much better name for a final boss than Vega, and I feel like the switch names fit the characters really well. I'll be going by the American names for these characters from here on, so just make a note of that. Street Fighter II Champion Edition made the 4 bosses of Shadaloo playable in arcade mode, and Super Street Fighter II added 4 more original characters: Cammy White from England, Fei Long, the token Bruce Lee homage from Hong Kong, DJ, the Jamaican dancer, and T-Hawk, the Native American who resides in Mexico. After defeating M.Bison in the final battle, a small sequence of pictures shows what happens to your character after you win the tournament. They range from the serious endings, like Ken marrying his girlfriend Eliza, Chun-Li avenging the death of her father at the hands of Bison, and Guile avenging the death of his friend Charlie, who was also killed by Bison. There are also weird endings like this shit. Canonically speaking, it's unclear who won this tournament, but one thing that is definitely confirmed is what happens at the end of Super Turbo. So, you go through arcade mode without continuing or losing a round, and you're ready to fight Bison as usual, but then... what the fuck? Bison just got murdered! Who the fuck is this guy? He's Akuma, someone who practices the same martial art as Ryu and Ken, but has taken a dark path and has become a demon. He's also the hardest fucking fight in the entire game, so prepare yourself. While the story doesn't give much, it's still nice to have a diverse roster of playable characters. Some of the fighters toe the line between cultural representative and racist caricature though, which still makes me feel a little uncomfortable. Regardless, if you're looking for deep story in your fighting games, the 90s was the wrong time period to find it. While Street Fighter 1 looked pretty solid as arcade games go, all editions of Street Fighter 2 have great graphics for the time period. These games used the CP System Arcade Board, or CPS-1 as it will be known as later, for its graphics. The CPS-1 board was first made popular with 1989's Final Fight, further intertwining both series. The sprite arts for all the characters look great, they all look distinct, and the designs themselves have become iconic for years to come. As previously mentioned, the game does use cultural stereotypes to portray some characters, but most of the time, each character has aspects that tie them back to the country they come from, like Ryu's karate gi, Chun-Li's Chi-Pao, and E Honda's sumo garb. Also, the stages these characters fight on tie into their culture. For example, you fight Ken in front of his yacht because he's rich as fuck, you fight E-Honda in a traditional Japanese bathhouse, and Gaio at an American military base. Like the previous game, each character has their own stage and theme music. Oh my god, the music! Yoko Shimomura, the lead composer for this game, would go on to make the themes that would be associated with these characters for almost 30 years. Some of my favorites are the themes of Ryu and Ken, obviously also Gaio's theme since it goes with everything. Balrog's and Sagat's themes are also terrific. While the music is not only catchy, it also gives a bit more personality to the game, since every character has their own theme song. On the subject of sound design, the punches and kicks sound great and make your attacks feel powerful. It is important that these hits sound distinct, so players can quickly determine what move to do next. There's also some voice acting, with some characters calling out their moves when they do them. This is also important for competitive matches, since it takes less time to react to an audio stimulus as opposed to visual. Thankfully, the characters have unique win quotes this time around, and the winner of the fight gets the privilege to talk shit. They're not character specific, but this is another way the characters can give hints on their personality and add a little character depth. To start off, let's go more in depth on the changes between versions. Street Fighter II the original had a selection of 8 playable characters for arcade and versus play, but you couldn't pick the same character as your opponent. Street Fighter II Champion Edition added the 4 bosses as playable characters and the ability to mirror match and change the color of your character. Street Fighter II Turbo Hyper Fighting not only increased the speed of the game, but added the ability to execute special moves in the air and gave Chun-Li a projectile and Dhalsim a teleport. Super Street Fighter II added Cammy, DJ, Fei Long, and T-Hawk and moved the series over to the CPS2 arcade board. Finally, Super Street Fighter II Turbo added Akuma as a hidden boss, selectable game speeds, a super meter that allows for high damage special moves when it's filled, and the ability to play as the versions of characters from Hyper Fighting. Now that that's out of the way, we can talk about the actual mechanics. So you know how sometimes programmers encounter a bug, but then realize that they created something awesome and implemented it as a mechanic? That's what happened with the combo system in Street Fighter II. Yep, the one thing that all fighting games moving forward were based around was an accident. The story goes that the developers noticed that you can cancel the animations for regular punches and kicks into special moves. These special moves will land while the opponent continues to recover from being hit the first time executing a combo. It adds a ton of strategy to the game and rewards special move execution with damaging combos. The developers thought so too, and from then on, fighting games have all types of move cancels, and combos became the backbone of the fighting game genre. Speaking of the special moves, thank God you can actually execute them in this game. Street Fighter II has a variety of different ways to do moves, but most of them yet again require you to move the stick in a certain direction and press punch or kick on the same 6-button layout from the original Street Fighter. Some of the motions can be a little tough, but I've been trying to teach my friends how to do them, and all it takes is some practice. My least favorite motions are charge motions, which is what characters like Guile and Chun-Li specialize in. You have to hold the stick in one direction for a few seconds, and then move it in the opposite direction and press a button. For example, Guile's Sonic Boom requires moving the stick backwards relative to your position, and then forwards while pressing a punch button. It takes some time to get used to, but it's rewarding if you want to see yourself get better at fighting games, since all of them use variations of these special move inputs. One more fighting game staple that this series added was the throw mechanic. It's a counter to those players that will just block everything. If you walk forward and press heavy punch while your opponent isn't attacking, you throw them for massive damage. This adds more depth to the gameplay and yet again has become a thing that all fighting games have now. While I enjoy these games, they aren't without their problems, oh my goodness. The stun mechanic isn't my favorite thing in the world, and just adds insult to injury when playing against players just learning the game. It's also kinda random when it comes out, and can lead to massive damage. Speaking of, the damage of combos is crazy. I mean, look at what Blanca just did to me. Not a fan. Also, this is just a word of warning for those looking to play arcade mode on the version of Super Turbo in the 30th Anniversary Collection. There was a glitch in the original arcade release that kept the difficulty level at maximum no matter what, and this glitch is in this version of the game. The modern releases of Street Fighter II also have online multiplayer in addition to local multiplayer. The multiplayer component is the main reason why Street Fighter II has held out for so long, and the reason why you have major esports tournaments that only focus on Street Fighter II's multiplayer. Difficulty nitpicks aside, Street Fighter II has fun gameplay that keeps you coming back. It's also a fun game for historical purposes, since you can truly see the progenitor of the modern fighting game. Allow me to throw you a curveball, because the next game I'm covering is in fact not Street Fighter 3, but Street Fighter Alpha, which takes place in between the first and second game. As such, we see younger versions of characters and slightly more focus on the overarching plot. We'll cross that bridge when we get there next time when I cover all 3 Street Fighter Alpha games. Thank you for watching this episode of Castar Reviews. Subscribe for more content from me and follow me on Twitter for production updates. See you soon.